It's 4 p.m. We're bringing developing news.
And the stories behind the headlines. This is Storycon. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Ed Lingao. Some stories for watching this midweek, July 30. Vice President Sara Duterte thanks her defense team and supporters after the Supreme Court declared the impeachment case against her unconstitutional. She also vowed to stand against, and we quote, greedy leaders whom she claimed would bring the nation down. The Supreme Court earlier ruled that the impeachment articles violated Duterte's right to due process and the one-year bar rule.
Senator Ping Lacson has accepted the chairmanship of the Senate Committee on Electoral Reforms. He vows to prioritize the passage of the anti-political dynasty bill that would bar spouses and relatives of incumbent officials up to the second degree from running in the same city or province during the elections. Lacson says the measure aims to curb political inequity and fulfill the constitutional mandate to guarantee equal access to public service.
And authorities are monitoring areas along the eastern Philippine coast after a tsunami alert issued by PHIVOLCS. The agency earlier warned that tsunami waves less than 1 meter high may reach parts of the country between 1:20 p.m. and 2:40 p.m. today. Warnings have also been issued for parts of Russia, Japan, Alaska, Hawaii, and the U.S. West Coast after the magnitude 8.7 earthquake of Kamchatka in Russia. A former Supreme Court justice raises the possibility of a constitutional crisis if the Senate does not abide by the Supreme Court's ruling on Duterte's impeachment. However, former Supreme Court Associate Justice Adolfo Ascuna clarifies that this is just one scenario among a few that could arise if the upper chamber goes ahead and convenes as an impeachment court. Ascuna, who was also one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, explains how a constitutional crisis would be triggered in this case.
My own concept is for them to abide by the Supreme Court ruling so as not to cause a constitutional crisis. Supreme Court already said that the Senate did not acquire jurisdiction and therefore cannot try the case. So if the Senate proceeds to try the case, you'll have two bodies, independent bodies contradicting each other, and that is not good. That is what is called the pathology of a legal system, when there is not just a violation of peace and order, but there is a violation of the rule of recognition. In other words, the rule of the Constitution is not interpreted in the same way by the branches of government. That is a crisis.
But former Justice Ascuna says all is not lost for those pushing for Duterte's impeachment, especially the House of Representatives. A motion for reconsideration can be filed, which Supreme Court justices could tackle through oral arguments.
Supreme Court should have asked for comment, as they invariably did in previous cases, or answer from the respondents before deciding the case merely on the response to questions that it posed, which is not sufficient to allow the respondents to give its full side to the controversy. The MR of the House would give the court an opportunity to allow a fuller discussion of the facts, because this decision depends so much on the facts, and this can be done through oral arguments. And not only that, in an oral argument on the MR, an oral argument on the MR will allow a full court, not just unanimous, but a full court, because Justice Kagiwa, who recused himself, is allowed under the rules to take part in the oral arguments. He's not allowed to vote, but he can take part. He can ask questions. And Justice Singh, who is only may participate, hopefully she will be able to participate. So you can have a full court listening to the oral arguments, participating, rather than just 13.
Bacolod City Representative Albi Benitez says questionable budget allocations prompted his decision to join the independent bloc in the House. In an interview with 1PH's One Balita Pilipinas, he cited the alleged removal of a 300 million peso floodgate project for Bacolod from the final budget despite initially being included. Benitez questioned why other districts allegedly received over 20 billion pesos while their climate resilience projects were dropped. He joins Navota's Representative Toby Tiangco and Cebu Congressman Duke Frasco in the House's so-called independent bloc.
Questionable budget na tingin ko hindi dapat ginawa, no? For example, sa Bacolod, meron pa kami tinutulak na floodgates, no? Dahil ang pananaw namin at sa aming pag-review, no? Ang global warming is causing a lot of floods sa lahat ng mga lugar sa buong mundo. So kailangan po natin itayo, i-calibrate ang mga flood controls to flood gates and pumping station. So nandun na po yun, di ba? Nasa budget na. Pagkatapos bigla po nawala ng BICAM. So isa po yan sa mga gusto ko i-question kasi nakikita namin yung mga ibang distrito, napakalaki po ng budget. May mga 20 billion plus nakukuha samantalang yung 300 million floodgates project namin biglang nawala. Ito yung mga bagay na tas sinabi rin ng Presidente, di ba? Aside from budget allocation, pati yung mga sinasabi niyang for the boys, SOP, mga questionable flood control projects. So, ito po mga dahilan kung bakit sabi namin, hindi kami sang-ayon sa current leadership.
And joining us today, Regina Lay. Sorry.
Na-introduce ko na sarili ko. I introduced myself already. What he's trying to say, everyone, is we don't have Ami today.
Or
There's also no Ronald today. Ronald is busy.
Took a break today from us.
Parang
or we took a break from him.
Midweek break. Yeah, he's guesting at another at our sister program.
A radio program ng TV5.
With our sister show. So he couldn't make it today.
Just to put context sa sinabi ni Adolf, I know where Adolf is coming from. I've been reading his posts since over the weekend. He's basically saying na, let's go through the process and the Supreme Court has ruled until and unless that ruling is overturned by a motion for reconsideration, for example, then let's go through the process and follow the rules, which means that the Supreme Court has spoken so far. And the Senate cannot just ignore the ruling at the risk of having a constitutional crisis. However, Justice Adolf is still insisting na while apparently legal yung ruling sa impeachment case ng Supreme Court, he's questioning the fairness. And among other things, also the issues of accountability will be lost. And actually, in his more recent post, mas detalyado siya eh.
So
he was also saying the Supreme Court basically did not give due process, even though it's asking for due process to the House of Representatives. That's why he's saying na better if we have oral arguments through the motion for reconsideration to be filed by the House, because apparently, according to Adolfo Ascuna, the Supreme Court itself did not give due process to the House.
He made a lot of points actually about due process. From what I understood was that he was questioning the constitutional basis.
Yeah, all the new rules
for insisting on applying due process in all phases of the impeachment, right? So remember the part that they're arguing about right now is the part where the initiating part, what constitutes something being initiated, which there already was jurisprudence.
That's Francisco
in the
versus
Francisco
House of
versus HOR case.
2003.
Oo. Na parang nabaliktad in this instance, right? Nabago siya. And in any case, Justice Ascuna was questioning whether there was constitutional basis, and for him, there is no constitutional basis for insisting on due process in all phases of the impeachment. The second thing about fairness is that I didn't realize this is my bad, but I didn't realize he was also one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution. So he specifically said na they deliberately changed that in the 1987 Constitution changing it from the 1935
35,
Constitution. They, in the 1987 Constitution, they made it deliberately easier to enforce accountability. So they took down the
Binawasan
number of
yung ratio,
votes.
yeah.
Oo, the number of the ratio needed to convict or acquit somebody. So, for instance, in the 1935 Constitution, you need 2/3 of the House in order to impeach someone, an official. They took it down to 1/3. For the Senate naman, dati 3/4 yun,
yeah.
tapos naging 2/3 na ngayon. So they deliberately took it down, and the intent of that is to specifically make it easier to enforce accountability, which again, he says, in this case, is not being followed. The spirit of the Constitution is not being abided by, right? And then finally, yung constituent powers. Ito na yung part where they being the three of them, the Senate, the lower house, and the Supreme Court being supposedly co-equal branches of government, just as Escudo was saying, they have the HOR has constituent powers, which means that they have sovereign powers, right? The Constitution gave them sole authority to initiate an impeachment complaint, and sabi ni Justice Acuna, the cardinal rule when it comes to constituent powers is where the Constitution puts it, there it should stay, right? You can't have another branch of government coming in and deciding, no, you're doing things the wrong way, this is how you should interpret.
Also, he also makes a point about against the new requirements being put forth or being required by the Supreme Court to meet its new due process rule for impeachment, which includes, among other things, naka-specify sa Supreme Court ruling. Number one, dapat bigyan ng prior notice yung accused or respondent. Number two, kailangan to hear out the respondent. In several other previous impeachment cases, walang ganun eh. For example, in the case of Erap, si Villar just rammed it through. He just read and then there was an uproar in the House, and that was it. And it was transmitted to the Senate, and that was the impeachment.
And it wasn't questioned back then,
yeah,
if I recall correctly.
So there's prior notice. There's also the requirement that the respondent also gives his side. And the requirement now to attach evidence to both the copies to be given to the congressman and to the copy to be given to the respondent. So even the evidence is supposed to be given to the respondent na. So you have a lot of things that that's being asked of now of the lower chamber, which is not in the Constitution.
So bottom line, it makes it more difficult to try to hold somebody accountable, to try to hold an elected official accountable, is Justice Ascuna's point, because you're adding all of these steps to the process, right? When, according to him, the Constitution is pretty clear about what needs to be done.
Ito nga sabi ni Alpha, the Supreme Court cannot be the one to craft the rules to enforce Article 11 of the Constitution, because in the Constitution it says that Congress and the Senate it's up to them to make the rules, the procedural rules on how the impeachment and the trial is supposed to be done. That's in the Constitution,
And
Article
because
11.
because Supreme Court judges themselves are impeachable officials,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point.
So they, basically, what's happening right now is they're crafting the rules for something that should also
That
hold
may
them
also apply to
accountable.
them.
Yeah, that also apply to them. And that's what some of these other legal experts are questioning. Well, speaking of legal experts, let's bring in our first guest for today. We've got Attorney Egon Cayosa. He's the former chief of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. Good afternoon, Attorney.
Good afternoon,
Thanks
sir.
for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon at magandang hapon sa nakikinig at nanonood sa inyo.
Yes, sir. Sir, very interesting back and forth. We've been reading, some of the writings of former justices of the Supreme Court. Of course, we've also read the Supreme Court ruling. In this cutting, each lawyer has his own interpretation of how things go. But from your perspective, sir, give us your perspective. What do you think?
Well, first, I'd like to commend you and other members of media and other lawyers or even non-lawyers for discussing this controversial decision. Because if we frame it in the aspect of accountability of high government officials, this is a very important decision. if we look at it from the perspective of the Constitution being the supreme law, to which all the branches of government must submit themselves, it is very important. So congratulations to all of you. The overall effect of this, when we talk about accountability of high public officials, it will make it more difficult for our people to file or hold accountable the high government officials of our land. Secondly, in terms of constitutional principles, there seems to be, and there is reason for many who are saying there's judicial overreach here, and the decision seems to add or subtract from or add to the provisions of the Constitution, which they cannot do. They cannot do. And lastly, or thirdly, is the question of fairness. The Supreme Court makes in the decision, cites so much material and due process and fairness, but in this particular case, it now looks that they are not fair to the House of Representatives, because it now appears, after we see the whole text of the decision, and now the House of Representatives is planning to file an MR, that number one, there are factual errors in the statements or appreciation of the Supreme Court. Secondly, it appears that the House of Representatives followed their own rules, the Constitution, the timelines, and the guidance of the Supreme Court in its earlier ruling, the Francisco ruling. But now they changed the guidelines and make it retroactively applicable to the House. So again, that's not fairness. We would understand why this case is very controversial, and I think it will be good for our country that it is discussed in detail.
Yung question at the heart of this, attorney, seems to be, one of the questions at the core of this is what constitutes an impeachment complaint being initiated, right? And to our understanding, meron na pong jurisprudence on this in terms of the one-year bar rule, which a lot of people are now saying that the Supreme Court changed. Are they allowed to do that? Could you help us understand this part of the process? Bakit po controversial siya?
It is controversial because at the time the House of Representatives processed the 4 impeachment complaints, the prevailing rule would be the rules of the House, the rules of procedure, the Constitution, of course, and the doctrine laid down by the Supreme Court in the Francisco ruling. What did the Supreme Court say in the Francisco ruling? The Constitution says there can only be one impeachment complaint initiated within a year. So that's very clear. So, but then the Constitution is silent. When do we start counting or considering that there is an initiated impeachment proceeding? The Supreme Court in the Francisco ruling said it's not when somebody files a case. That's not the start. It is when because the House is supposed to, if there are cases filed by individuals, sponsored by a congressman, or filed by a congressman himself, the process would be for the House of Representatives to evaluate, look at the supporting documents, see if they're complete or authentic or genuine and sufficient, and then they will refer it to the Committee on Justice. So the Supreme Court said it's not the filing, it's when the House acts on it and refers it to the Committee on Justice. Okay, so in this particular case, there were 3 cases. They were all entertained by the House, but it took their time for whatever reason. And then they acted on it within the prescribed period of 10 calendar days. So hindi totoo yung sinasabing inupuan nila. They acted on it within the time limit prescribed by the Constitution. But meron ding dumating, there was a consolidated complaint, the 4th one, which was referred to the House plenary. So that was acted upon first by the House. It was approved by not only one-third, which is the minimum, but more than two-thirds. And it was transmitted to the Senate. And then thereafter, the House said, yung tatlong mga complaint din, since we already acted on the fourth complaint, then we will just archive them.
Right. But sir, is it so unusual to change jurisprudence even though there is a precedent? Of course, the law is still a living thing, no? And what applied maybe 20 years ago may not necessarily apply in this instance. And I guess that is why we have courts, right? But what do you think? Is it really so unusual to be overturning jurisprudence?
And every now and then, the Supreme Court changes doctrine. It's allowed. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court is not error-free, and that's why every now and then, the Supreme Court corrects itself and adjusts the doctrines to the realities of the present time. So they are allowed to do that. But in these instances, there's what we call a very settled doctrine of operative fact. It is unfair, so the Supreme Court can change the doctrine, but usually they will say this will apply prospectively to be fair, because you cannot also fault people for relying on your doctrine and then punishing them or castigating them later on. So usually when the Supreme Court changes doctrine, the application of that new doctrine, just like any law, should be prospective. So that's where the trouble arises, because in this particular case, parang naging retroactive to it.
Sir, let me quote from the Supreme Court ruling on the impeachment case. The one-year ban should be reckoned from the initiation of the impeachment complaint. If unacted upon, or when it is dismissed if it has been partially acted upon. The one-year ban may also start to commence upon the violation of the fundamental rights of the respondent, which ousts the House or the Senate of jurisdiction. So this particular sentence, among other sentences in the ruling, would make it appear like, whatever, any verified complaint filed with the House triggers a one-year ban or the one-year bar. So the question would be then, what's to stop dummy complaints from being filed? I do remember nung panahon ni GMA, sunod-sunod ang pag-file ng mga so-called dummy complaints to immunize the president from legitimate or real or serious impeachment complaints. I'm sure you remember. I'm sure you know which lawyer I'm referring to. I will not state the name because he's already passed away. Pero there was this lawyer who was so famous for filing every year. Inuunahan niya yung iba magsampa ng impeachment complaint to immunize GMA. So what's to stop that now?
And they were based on...
magpasalamat.
Precisely, the Francisco ruling was to stop that farce, di ba? Yung kalokohan na yan. And the Francisco ruling was widely applauded by everybody. Unlike this place. So the doctrine was sound. That's why people or lawyers or even non-lawyers are surprised bakit ngayon iniba nila. Because wala namang material differences dito eh. So, but even assuming that they think this is the better one, because, it depends on the composition of the Supreme Court also. Matatalino naman lahat mga yan. But if they do so decide na palitan yung doktrina, di ba dapat it should be made to apply prospectively. Sa Constitution nga, bawal yung retroactive effect of laws. Bawal yun as a general principle. So, in this particular case, mas katanggap-tanggap sana, and it will be fair, as some respected retired justices say, it should be fairer if prospective ito. Kasi nga, nag-rely naman yung mga abogado at mga congressman dito sa jurisprudence nila na existing at the time they process the impeachment complaints.
That's what they mean when they said that they abided by the Constitution and they followed all the legal framework around this when they filed. Tapos biglang the rules changed and then it was applied retroactively.
Pwede ko sundin yun. Sir, if I may, is this the first time the Supreme Court did this? Hasn't the Supreme Court done this in previous cases where in redefining definitions, it changed things midstream. Like for example, well, tell me lang if this is apples and oranges or apples and apples, ha? So you're the lawyer, I'm not the lawyer. For example, yung the rule on early campaigning of yung sa Peñera case, di ba? The Supreme Court ruled na hindi early campaigning yan, hindi siya counted as early campaigning because hindi pa nagsisimula ang campaign period. So didn't that redefine, for example, early campaigning midstream as well, yung the party list rule on what party list groups are allowed? Didn't that also change everything midstream? So I'm wondering lang if this is similar to that in the sense na it's Supreme Court saying na these are the rules that should be in effect right now.
Well, it depends on the particular details of each case. But you're correct. There are exceptional cases where the decision of the Supreme Court was given retroactive effect. But you have to look at the nuances. That is acceptable and that is fair if there is an accused or a respondent who is prejudiced by a wrong or decision or an outdated practical rule or decision. And that's why, for example, decisions that are favorable to the accused are given retroactive effect. Why? Because of the constitutional presumption of innocence. Okay? So, but then in this particular case, yung nasa kabila ang respondent is a co-equal branch of government, the House of Representatives. They also have what we call the doctrine of presumption of validity and legality and constitutionality of official acts of government. Especially so when it comes to impeachment, it is very clear in the Constitution. It's not just a constitutional right, but a constituent power and right of Congress to take care of the details of impeachment, both the House and the Senate. So if you look at all these nuances, masusurprise ka talaga dito sa seemingly retroactive effect of this new decision.
But, sir, there is also something to be said about the fact that it was a unanimous decision, and this is the highest court of the land, right? I mean, what do we make of that? Okay sana, I mean, if they were split.
If they were split. Margin, eh.
Oh, but this is 13-0. Two did not vote, but 13-0. So we have to put weight on that too, don't we?
Well, when the Supreme Court decides whether it is a split decision or a unanimous decision, it doesn't really matter, because it's the legality of or the soundness of the decision. So for us, for people who comment or evaluate, it holds very little weight. Hindi naman sila politicians. So dapat yan is ebidensya. Ano bang katotohanan? What are the facts? What are the rules? Or what does the Constitution say in spirit and in the text? So maaring mag-factor in lang yan dun sa tsansa na magre-reconsider ba sila. So that's another thing. But it doesn't really matter. When we analyze decisions of the Supreme Court, whether they are sound or not, the number of those who agreed with the decision does not carry much weight. Because kung nagkamali ka, mali yung facts mo, mali talaga kahit 10 kayo o mag-isa ka lang. It doesn't really matter. So when we talk of constitutional principles that are settled, then it doesn't really matter whether there are 13 of you or you're split. Maganda nga yung thinking ng iba na why did you not conduct an oral argument or some suggestions it might be good for them to give the MR a chance so that an oral argument so that everybody could hear it, assuming they will allow public oral arguments, and the full court or the other two who were not there can participate. So these are just mechanisms by which we hope the Supreme Court will have a chance to correct itself.
I guess it came into play because na-politicized na, no, sir? There are a lot of people pointing to the fact that at least 9 of them were appointed by former President Duterte. And that colored this decision, unfortunately, right? How they
Rightly
voted...
or wrongly, it's
rightly or-
it's a perception that
Exactly. It created this
believes on that,
perception na, okay, the Supreme Court is also, susceptible to
Baka
political
makotem ka.
maneuvers. Created the perception. created,
Natakot kaya.
created a perception, a public perception that they're also susceptible to the political environment, right? So that's why I'm also we're also trying to understand what the law industry here is saying about it. And like I said, it's a vote of 13-0. If you're on the other side and you think, okay, that's a wrong decision, how could 13 judges get it wrong, right?
Or sir, to put it another way, how can 13 of the presumably best legal minds in the country, of course, this is a presumption, they may have feet of clay anyway, but anyway, that's not for us to say. But yeah, the presumption is there that they're the best legal minds of the country. And there are questions as to whether or not due process was conducted by the High Court. There are also questions as to whether or not the facts were the correct facts were looked at by the High Court. I mean, but these are 13 of the presumably best legal minds. So I mean, iba yun, sir, sa ano eh. I get what you mean, pero iba yun dun sa ano eh. Yung naghati sila 6 versus 7, pero majority pa rin ng 7. Isa lang yung ano, so iba pa rin yung ganun.
Well, one, it's very unfortunate that that's the public perception now. And what you say na feeling marami o yung iba politicized. That we should not evaluate or look at it that way. But unfortunately, that's the reality. Why? Because nga questionable yung basis or soundness of the decision. Kasi when we look at the decision, we should look at it regardless of who penned it, how many voted, or who are the parties involved. We should look at it from the perspective of the Constitution, accountable public official, balance of power, co-equal branch of government, and many of the settled principles. It's only unfortunate because of the sequence of events na ganun na ang paningin ng taong bayan. We don't even want to go to that. That's another matter. That's a political thing that people can look into. But as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, hindi dapat. Now, as to whether or not 13 can change their mind, it may be improbable, but it's possible. You talk about integrity. Because you cannot quarrel with facts. You could disagree among yourselves. You could be split about whether or not you change the policy or the interpretation. But when it comes to facts, there's only one true fact. So, dito, unfortunately, there are factual matters that are being pointed out at may basihan sila. So, to me, the Supreme Court, of course, when these things are questioned, when the Supreme Court, whether unanimously or in a split decision, commit errors of appreciation of fact, ang labo nun. Talagang it will greatly affect the integrity of the whole institution. So, maganda rin kung titignan nila, baka meron ding hindi nakita yung mga nagki-criticize, but facts are facts. So, it's the highest form of integrity, really, to correct yourself if you're wrong. Now, if you're correct, then you say so, but this have to come out. Hindi well-established yung factual basis with respect to yung sinasabi nila, and even the logic na the first complaint was deemed initiated when you adjourned. Adjournment was at 7 o'clock. Yung pag-approve dun sa fourth complaint was in the afternoon. So how will something that was even the deemed initiated is not in the Constitution, di ba? But even so, let's use their logic. if that was deemed initiated at 7 o'clock, kasi ang sabi ng Supreme Court, when you adjourn and you did not act on it, it is deemed na you acted on that. So when did that happen? 7
At 7
o'clock.
o'clock.
But the approval by the two-thirds vote of the congressman of the fourth complaint happened in the afternoon at transmit na nila sa Senado. So how can something that was deemed acted upon preclude action on the fourth complaint that was acted upon earlier? Ang labo ng logic na yan. So that again, the Supreme Court has to look into and decide. Pipilit ba nila? As you say, they're the Supreme Court, but there's a big difference between the ruling becoming final and binding from people believing in its justness or correctness.
Lastly, sir, so now you have the different branches of government disagreeing on the constitutional. At what point do we call it a constitutional crisis?
But I think even now there's already a sort of crisis, di ba? But let's not be afraid of constitutional crisis. It should not immobilize us. It should not seal our lips. It should not, blanket our minds, our rational thinking, and our search for the truth and fairness. Kasi hindi naman magkakagulo yan eh. And in the past, there have been some decisions of the Supreme Court that were really disregarded by other branches of government. We're not saying they should do it this time, but if, for example, the Senate decides to proceed with the trial and decide whichever way, whether to conform to the opinion or decision of the Supreme Court or to form their own opinion and agree with the similar to the Supreme Court's decision na wala silang jurisdiction or they say we have jurisdiction, we would understand why they do that because they have the constituent power. Nag-convene na sila eh. And to my mind, and the minds of many constitutional law experts, even jurists, trabaho ng Senado yan eh. That's possible. Magkakagulo ba ang Republika? Hindi naman. So, of course, the easiest way out is, as one lawmaker says, yan na yan, period. That's the easiest way out. Is that good for our country? So, binabalanse din ngayon yan ng ibang branches of government. For example, ang official statement ng Malacanang, which is the executive branch, is we will respect the decision, but it doesn't mean we agree with it. So, doon mo na makikita na hindi magkakapareho. And we should allow space for that. Hindi naman tayo, yung constitutional crisis, kasi hindi naman tayo mag-civil war dito. Hindi naman mag-crumble ang ekonomiya natin. We will not, it's just yung scheme of things. Kasi nga, and why did this happen? Because nga, as some say, may judicial overreach. So, sino ba nagsimula kasi nito? No? Instability in a different way. Yung legal instability. Kasi controversial yung decision.
Yeah.
Kasi kung matino yan o katanggap-tanggap at lahat ng hindi, sino ba naman ang hindi susunod yan?
Yeah.
So, yun ang pinanggagalingan. So we should not be afraid of that. We still have to trust that our elected congressmen and senators, the executive branch and the judicial branch will continue to function. Ang importante dito yung primacy of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Because the Supreme Court is not also above the Constitution. And the words of the Constitution are very clear and no official, no branch of government can add or subtract from that.
That's a great place to leave this conversation. Nothing to be afraid of. Kahit may constitutional crisis, we gotta leave space for these kinds of discussions. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Former Integrated Bar of the Philippines President Egon Cayosa. Salamat,
Thank you, sir.
Attorney.
Maraming salamat. Good afternoon to everyone.
You are watching Storycon on One News. We just need to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.
We've got developing news in the stories behind the headlines. Welcome back to Storycon, the Story Conference. I'm Ed Lingao.
And I'm Regina Lace. Thanks for staying with us. And let's now bring in News 5 correspondent Marian Enriquez, who's been covering the House of Representatives. Maan, day 3 na ng 20th Congress. What's happened to the House chairmanships at this point?
Nagparte-parte na raw.
Yes, tama nga kayo dyan, Reg and Bok. Talagang umpisa na nga ilatag kung sino-sino itong mga chairman ng bawat komite. Una na nga rin, pinasa kay Nueva Ecija 1st District Representative Micaela Swansing yung Appropriations Committee na nangunguna sa pagbusisi nga ng national budget. Itutuloy rin daw ng Kamara yung pagdinig ng Quadcom na nag-iimbestiga nga sa mga kasong may kinalaman sa illegal drug trade at mga human rights violation. At isa na nga sa mga naihaing resolusyon ay yung pag-iimbestiga sa missing sabongeros. Balik sa kanyang pwesto bilang chairman ng Committee on Human Rights, si Manila 6th District Representative Benny Abante. Nananatili rin bilang chairman ng Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability, si Manila 3rd District Representative Joel Chua. Committee on Public Order and Safety naman ang pamumunuan ni Manila 2nd District Representative Rolando Valeriano. Nahalal naman bilang chairman ng Committee on Dangerous Drugs, si Bukidnon 2nd District Representative Jonathan Keith Flores. Binigay naman kay Marikina 2nd District Representative Miro Kimbo ang Committee on Ways and Means na dumidinig ng mga tax and revenue legislation. Habang si Batangas 2nd District Representative Jerby Luistro naman ang magiging chairman ng Committee on Justice. Chairperson naman ng Committee on Accounts, si Davao de Oro 1st District Representative Maria Carmen Zamora. Mananatili naman chairman ng Agriculture Committee, si Quezon Representative Wilfredo Enverga. At sa Basic Education Committee, si Pasig City Representative Roman Romulo. Sa Higher Education Committee naman, si Tingog Party List Representative Jude Asidre. Habang si CDO Representative Rufus Rodriguez pa rin ang committee chairman ng Constitutional Amendments. At sa Labor naman, si Ramon Jolo Revilla III ang magiging chairman. Balik sa inyo.
Mayan, si Swansing is appropriations, no? Who does she replace? Kasi I remember si Zaldico was forced to or had to resign in January this year as Appropriations Committee Chairman. But I don't recall anymore kung sino pumalit sa kanya from January until the end of the 19th Congress, eh.
Yes, kung maalala mo, Bok, ang pumalit kay ko for the meantime, OIC noon, Senior Vice Chair, na si Marikina 2nd District Representative Stella Kimbo.
Si Stella,
so,
okay.
Siya yung pinalitan.
So OIC lang siya.
Hindi na nga, kasi di ba tumakbong mayor na ng Marikina, etong si Kimbo, pero natalo doon sa asawa ni MRC na si Maan Chodoro. So, ang asawa naman ni Stella Kimbo na si Kong Miro Kimbo, yung papalit naman sa Ways and Means.
Important important committees, ha. Okay. Si Swansing, is she a newcomer or
Hindi, she was there in the 19th Congress. Pero
19th
I think
Congress pa.
first committee chairmanship niya to, no? Maan?
Tama ka dyan, Reg. Parte din nga siya ng Young Guns, no? Mga first termer yan nung 19th Congress. At ngayon, chairman na siya nung House Committee on Appropriations.
Meron din House leadership. So of course, Speaker is still Martin Romualdez, and the House Majority Senior Deputy Speaker pala. Medyo mahaba yung title. Senior Deputy Speaker is si Congressman J.J. Suarez, and then House Majority Leader is Congressman Sandro Marcos, and House Minority Leader is Congressman Marcelo Libanan. Was there any surprises there, Maan? Or parang na-plan siya na by the time they went to a vote?
We've been hearing about these names na the past few weeks before itong pagbubukas ng 20th Congress. Matunog talaga nga na si magiging SDS o Senior Deputy Speaker, si Congressman J.J. Suarez, habang si Sandro Marcos nga yung magiging majority leader. Pero yung kay Libanan talagang solid na rin dati, no? Naririnig na natin kahit sa ibang mga party list leaders, kina Congresswoman De Lima, Shell Jokno, na ang susuportahan talaga nila si Nonoy Libanan. So hindi na rin talaga tayo na sorpresa doon. Meron pang bago, no, sa Senior Deputy Majority Leader, yung isang House Prosecutor na si Iloilo 3rd District Representative Congressman Noynoy Defensor.
He's not part of the House prosecution panel, no?
Yeah.
Yung medyo, that's a sort of new name as well.
Yes, maraming mga parte ng prosecution panel na nagkaroon nga ng mga key positions ngayon dito sa 20th Congress. Particular na nga rin si Congresswoman Jinky Luistro na chairman na ng Committee on Justice. Tapos yung isa pa si Keith Flores, bahagi na rin siya no ng Committee on Dangerous Drugs. Papalitan nga niya si Congressman Ace Barbers. At nakita rin natin, no, umakyat din yung dating minority na si Congressman Rog Gutierrez ay parte na rin ng mayorya ngayon at deputy majority leader na rin.
Oh, si Congressman Rog has become a part of the majority. That's interesting.
Tama.
And then the House Secretary General remains to be si SecGen Reginald Velasco. No?
Oo, tama. At
Kahit-
pati yung Sergeant at Arms din, si retired police Major General Napoleon Taas. So sila pa rin naman
kahit
yung
na,
SecGen.
kahit na the Supreme Court was questioning their role in the impeachment complaint.
Nagpalakpakan nga nung tama nga dyan, Reg, nagpalakpakan nung inanunsyo nga na siya pa rin yung Secretary General noong araw nung SONA.
Okay.
Ay, nung morning session.
I was wondering lang, although I don't know if the discussion is already gotten that far, if sabagay tagal pa nun eh. If we get to February 6, I'm sorry, when we get to February 6, yung unang napag-usapan ba kung yung unang impeachment complaint na ma-file paandrin na nila o they'll stick to the same routine?
Alam mo, Bok, kung tatanungin mo nga yung mga prosecutors, lahat sila ang sasabihin, hindi pa namin napag-uusapan yan. Yung February
Yeah,
6 ko na
it's
yung
too early
gagawin,
nga naman
magpapasa pa ng 1/3 o idadaan pa sa Committee on Justice. Pero kasi kung mababasa nyo, yung ruling ng SC, parang gusto nila ipadaan sa Committee on Justice. At doon nga magkakaroon talaga ng pagdinig, no? Talagang, I don't know kung paano magiging system nun. Kung idadaan sa Committee on Justice, aaraw-arawin ba nila yung hearing, iimbitahan si VP Sara at doon pa sasagutin.
And it's more of kung kailan mati-trigger yung yung initiation ng impeachment complaint eh.
If but we are also hearing that they might file the MR, the motion for reconsideration, this week, as early as Friday potentially, but nothing confirmed yet. So far, wala pa nagko-confirm.
Yes, wala pa rin nga, no? Ang sinasabi lang nila ay inaayos itong MR, yun yung abangan natin. Kung ano yung lalamanin din nila, yung arguments nga nila sa MR nila.
Okay.
Okay. Maraming salamat. Marian Enriquez, ang TV5 reporter sa Kongreso.
Thank you, Marian. Wala na tayong time, but we're supposed to talk also as well about the tsunami warning. May tsunami.
Akala ko may babatiin.
Unfortunately, it's another disaster. Pero sana naman it doesn't hit us.
Mukhang the FIBOX gave the all clear na for the Philippines.
Oh, because it was, if anything, the danger time was 1:20 to 2:40 today, no? So, but I think the warning is still up. The tsunami warning is still up on the eastern parts, the eastern seaboard after the 8.7 magnitude earthquake off the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia. But hopefully, again, it doesn't reach as far as here. That's all the time we have for today. Unfortunately, join us again tomorrow 4 p.m. for Storycon. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.
This is the Story Conference Group or the Storycon Group.